I am here with Dr. George Yancey and always right on time, Show Baraka. He is here, just jumped in right on time with the. I know you would never disappoint me with your background looking good and everything, and so it is good too.
Better background in mine, I tell you.
Yeah. But you have the educated. I'm educated. You know, like I'm all.
Let's be honest, that's a mess.
No, but listen, but a lot of times educators are messy. But like you have that I'm all substance thing, that vibe going on. I'm kind of compensating with the whole church and pastoral feel, and Show is this kind of the artistic kind of like, yeah, I got it, but you know, he's gonna come with this some stuff. And I mean, he got his validation on his like Show Baraka. Is that what it says? The Show Baraka show?
That's what it says.
There it is. See, you know what I'm saying? Hey, give yourself some
I got the education too. You see?
Okay, Tuskegee. There it is.
And look.
North Texas. Hey, I'm proud of you. I'm finally glad you are claiming North Texas, because a lot of times when I hear it's always TU, Tuskegee, and North Texas has always seemed like it's been on the back burner. So
it doesn't flow well. Like Tuskegee rhymes better, and TU rhymes better. UNT is not a good rhyming. It just doesn't flow like the rest of them.
Okay. Well, I mean, I get that. Now, Dr. Yancey, are you still at UNT?
No, actually, I'm not at Baylor.
Oh, you're at Baylor now.
I'm at Baylor, yes.
Okay. That is great.
That's been a switch, yes.
So,
I still live in Denton, though.
Whoa.
Yeah, I've been commuting, like, I had a once-a-week class, but commuting a once-a-week course with the whole virus stuff. Now, it was all online, so that makes it easier. So I still live in Denton. I love Denton. My wife and I talked about whether or not we would move to Waco, and probably after our kids are grown, but maybe before then. We'll see. So we got that. I'm not going to prejudge.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, let me say hello to Dr. Yancey.
How you doing?
I still remember my last couple months in Denton, coming over to your house and sitting with you and your wife and learning, and so I hope all is well with you.
Things are going well with you, I see.
Yeah.
Yes. So it is. You guys are both men that I love and respect and really appreciate you guys taking the time of getting on. We've been really this week getting on and just talking about. Last week was a tough week for the evangelical community. It was a tough week for the Black community. It was a tough week for American community. It was just a tough week in so many different ways. But it was also a week that was, that brought about, because finally, after 2 months of, deliberating, I don't know what was going on, that the justice system finally began to do its due diligence, and actually, with the Ahmaud Arbery situation that is going on. But that brought up a lot of different emotional things that are going on with a lot of different people. And for some people, it even could bring trauma. And so this whole week, every time this whole week I've been getting on, and so like starting since Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and now today, just been bringing on different people, or me just ranting, for however long. We're just talking about kind of where we are as a society. And, and for me specifically, that this is something that, it automatically like triggers me, because I think about 2016, right before the presidential election. That's when the Black Lives Matter, White Lives Matter, all lives matter, all of those things, all the murders and the deaths that were going on, the country, again, and it just seems like that there's an explosion that comes. It's like, I don't know, like we kind of like know it's there, but we kind of bury it, throughout the time. But then it seems like once like political elections come or whatever, then it just kind of these divides just get more and more exposed. And so, Dr. Yancey, you're not a Georgia native or a citizen, but right now, even from just opening back up, you see this divide. You see a divide, because there's a white governor, Black mayor, Republican, Democrat, like all of the stereotypes, all of the things. Again, you see the divide, and you're starting to see people using the N-word, and describing. I mean, just all of these things that are coming about the disagreeing about the urban, suburban, rural, So just a lot of tension, a lot of things that's going on in the body of Christ that causes divide. So we just really been saying like, okay, what do we got to do? How do we address this? And so I would love to first kind of get you guys' thoughts. And again, we're on Facebook Live. We got people who are already logged in and coming on all the way from Sam Dula, my wife, Angie, that she says hi, by the way, Holly and Rob, elders, pastors. We got pastors Josh Kranz from Philadelphia. We got people from all over, basically just wanting to chime in just to hear kind of your thoughts, when it comes to the divide. And what I would like for us to focus in on today is really the church's response. I mean, obviously, we can talk about a whole bunch of other things, but for us specifically as believers, how can we respond? Or how can we look at times like this and crises like this in a way that is effective and productive, to do that? And so that's really kind of what I wanted for us to talk about. We got about 30 minutes for us to do that. And so I would love just to kind of start with you, Dr. Yancey, and just kind of say, like, when all of this stuff came, specifically about the Mount Aubrey, situation and just the divide that oftentimes that it brings between Black Christians, white evangelicals, so on and so forth, that we see taking place in our church. Just want to get your thoughts and opinions of how this all settles with you.
Yeah, thanks, and I want to, I think, first start off with something a little bit more personal, and then I want to get into the church, because I think we have to sort of do that, And, you have 3 Black men on here, so I think that, we have a certain position. And let me just first start by saying that I am not one where every time there's a shooting of a Black, automatically goes to racism. Because, even without racism, people are going to get shot. Sometimes the police are going to shoot. Sometimes the shooting is a legitimate shooting, and sometimes it is not. And sometimes there are whites who are killed illegitimately by the police. So I don't automatically go to that. This one hit me a little bit harder, though, than most. And I think the reason why is, I'm not a jogger. My knees don't allow to do anymore. I'm getting older. You can relate to that, Dhati?
Yes.
But I cycle. And I could have been a guy cycling out there and someone stops me and 2 people come out with guns. And I know that if someone pushes guns, you don't go with them. And so I would resist. I mean, that could have been me. And it's not just that it could have been me because I cycle. It's because as an African-American man, my experience of life is that people fear me more. I've gotten older now, so maybe I don't look quite so fearsome. But I remember car doors locking, driving past. I hear a bunch of car doors locked, just drive past me, walking in the parking lot. I remember people crossing the street just because I'm behind them. And so I know that there's this racially inspired fear that African-American men face. And regardless of whatever else, I believe that was part of why Aubrey is dead. That racially inspired fear. Now, I'm not even getting into the legal aspect of it, and I can also get into, why the tape, had to take and watch it 2 months for it to lead to trial. I'm not even getting into all that. I'm just saying that as me emotionally, part of it, and once again, I'm not one who automatically goes to the racism part.
Yeah, no, that's helpful, and I think that's really helpful for us to know. I mean, sure, I would love to hear from you personally, like as you hear and receive the news and heard the news, like what was your first response? What is your first reaction around situations like this?
My first response is like, oh, as Donald Glover says, this is America. Mm-hmm. It's like I don't. It's sad because you never want to get to the point where you're apathetic, but I'm never shocked by these things. I am the type of person. Some years ago when I began to make music that was socially charged, I felt responsible to be somewhat of a conduit for, you say just more of like someone who commentates on society from a Christian perspective, but I'm also often given information from fans who want to hear my perspective. Sometimes I think I'm wise in withholding my views, and sometimes I'm very hasty in like sharing my thoughts when I probably should have thought through it more. However, this is just one of many things that have crossed my desk, as you can imagine, within the last couple of months. And as Dr. Yancey said, this is, I guess you can say, part and parcel. This is just common within American society. Though every incident is not a racial incident, it makes you wonder how white America views Black bodies and Black individuals, because I'm just thinking, like, not too long ago about a young girl who was arrested, a 6-year-old girl at a charter school who was arrested for throwing a tantrum and apparently, I guess, kicked one of the teachers. I'm watching a video of a police officer a couple weeks ago going blow to blows with a teenage kid. So, these are the types of interactions that I think are problematic within America, because I think America just has a ridiculous fetish with violence, and we resolve our conflicts with violence. And this is something that I think the Christian can speak to in ways. But however, I think the Christian, especially the Southern Christian, also fetishes with violence, and we justify violence at every turn. And I think that's quite problematic.
Yeah. And I think, and that's one of the things that we recognize, is that high profile cases and high profile things like this does not, create the division. High profile things exposes the division that is already
Absolutely.
there and that is already happening. And so, but how are we to address it? What is your perspective? And Dr. Yancey, you wrote a book, and I would love for you to just briefly kind of give us, beyond racial gridlock, the 4 kind of worldly perspectives that people usually have when it comes to, trying to bring about reconciliation, in this, are really, how do they address this issue, and just the kind of the 4 profiles of individuals that you put, I think was so good in your book, Beyond Racial Gridlock.
Yeah, and realize that these are, exaggerations, a little bit stereotypes. But, the first person is colorblind. And so in this situation, the person would say, well, race didn't matter, it may be a tragedy, and these guys may go to jail, but it wasn't our race. Second is angle conformity. And that's the perspective that if people of color act like whites, then they'll succeed. And so, I don't know if it would fit in this particular situation, as far as, because I don't think, Aubrey was poor or anything like that. I don't know all the background or anything like that. But if he was, and they would say, he needs to
get a
job and that sort of thing. And then things will be great. Third is multiculturalism, and looking at the cultures of different groups, and that we denigrate it. And so there's a denigration of cultures of color. And then the last is white responsibility, which says that people of color cannot be racist, that says that all the problems are due to whites and what they do, and that's a problem. And what we do is we argue perspectives without trying to understand where they're coming from.
Yeah.
And my fear is that, I know what I want to see happen, and I think what I want to see happen is legit. My fear is if that's the only thing that does happen, then what we do is that people who, and by the way, this is an issue where I think most people, at least, how should I put this? At least overtly are disturbed by what happens. There is some pushback, but most people are disturbed. But if all we do is don't communicate what's happening and why we feel the way, and understand other people, and all we do is sort of say, all right, this is what's going to happen, and you have to take it, then all we're going to get is resistance right back.
Yeah. And I think that's an important perspective. And what I loved about the book, and you guys can see the sanctuary, and some of you guys who were a part in 2016 when all this happened, and when President Trump was elected, literally, we had all the congregation come, not all, but people who come, and we came here at around 9 o'clock, and we said, hey, if you believe in the colorblind model, sit over here. If you believe in the Anglo conformity model, sit over there. And I literally had them all split up to say, what are you most, kind of lean towards when it comes to the solution? And obviously we know in your book that there's also the mutually responsible model that's within the book. But I just want to say, these views, but what I love about the book too is that you give dignity to each one of the perspectives. It's not just kind of like you're shooting all the perspectives, but you're giving dignity to those, perspectives in terms of kind of how we, approach the situation. And I think that what that does, and what I feel like is, it's like the church needs to be a place where we can have genuine and honest conversations, that we need to be able to tell the truth about what's going on inside of us so that we can have honest conversations. You got to give people space to be able to really have these types of dialogues. And so that's kind of one of the reasons why, I wanted to definitely have you on here. And again, if you're on the feed, please put your comments in, put your thoughts in, however you guys, some questions you want them to answer. But like we come at things from a little different perspective. I think we both have a desire that we want God to be honored, but we come at it from a different vantage point, me and you, in terms of just kind of how we look and kind of approach, things. You have a more prophetical voice about what you're, how you go about doing things. And I think that is a great thing. And, me being the middle child, I probably have a more diplomatic approach to doing things, even, a more diplomatic approach to being able to address things. But based upon those models and, and kind of what Dr. Yancey, I don't know if you read the book, but the models that you have not?
No, I have not.
Okay. But just like when you think about those perspectives and that just general summary, what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I felt like I caught most of it, but
so again, white, he says the colorblind model.
Which is terrible.
Yeah, colorblind model. Then he said the other one was the Anglo-conformity model, which I think is more of the economic model. If everybody is, the middle class model in a sense.
Okay.
Then there's the multicultural model, and that's the old traditional impact, crusade, epic, destino model. And then the last one is the white responsibility model, that we ultimately can't be racist because we don't have power. The people who are in power need to fix it, i.e. the white responsibility.
Yeah. So, to be fair, and I know there's, and I think you communicated, I think there's nuance. Obviously, Dr. Yancey is a brilliant individual, and I'm sure there's great nuance and complexity to each individual. And I can think of not only people who I know who fall in line of all of these, but I know myself, I myself have probably fallen in each one of these categories. I do think a lot of the problem with Black progression, liberation, however you want to communicate it, is that oftentimes we think about ourselves. We think about ourselves in opposition to whiteness. And I think that's probably most of our problem. It's like, well, the only way to succeed is the zero sum of what white people say. So whatever Blackness is, I know it's not whatever this is. And for me, I think most of our energy, I think a lot of wasted energy is put towards how do we appease whiteness, or how do we integrate into whiteness, rather than how do we begin to build identity within ourselves, right? So, for instance, I think about the Marbury situation. This is just a small microcosm of my world. Like when I run in my neighborhood, because I run a lot, and I've been running for the last 3 years. When I run in my neighborhood, I don't have to necessarily worry about white people chasing me down, thinking that I've just stolen something, because I live in a predominantly Black community, in a predominantly Black neighborhood. The things I have to worry about is loose pit bulls and Rottweilers chasing it, right? And jokers put your dogs on leashes. But anyway, so for me, I'm thinking like, rather than me trying to figure out how to build multicultural worlds, my passion has been, how do I build economic structures? How do I create music? How do I create content? How do I build these things that I think speak to the affirmation of Blackness in a biblical context, in a world that I felt like has been missing? So for instance, even in my theological studies, for the most of my time, I was always concerned with, well, Reformed theology versus this theology, and what does this dead white man have to say about who I am and what the gospel means? And then I began to just digging through history and say, there are people who love the Lord. They may have had a different perspective and a way of how they express their religious beliefs, but they loved the Lord, and they didn't have the resources that I don't know, Whitfield had. They didn't have the resources that Edward had. But to tell me that their theological constructs weren't just as beautiful and powerful as those individuals, to me, is a part of the systemic problem within our faith and how we view Christianity. And so, though I love some of the models that you talked about within Crusade and the multicultural models, I feel like even in building those models, oftentimes we do that at the risk of affirming the dignity of who we are, because we're always trying to figure out how do we bring collaboration when we've never really, well, I would like to say that I don't know if we've really ever given time to building up the identity of Blackness within a Christian framework that I think is healthy and built around economic, spiritual, social, et cetera, because we're always trying to integrate.
Is that something that we can avoid, as it relates? And then the reason why I say that is because, one, Christianity I believe is the only truly global religion, and I'm not going to go into that, but just talking about Christianity is one of the few, if not only religion, that 90% of its participants is not in the country of its origin. All the other religions are still in the country of its origin. And that's very important because Jesus built the whole essence of go and make disciples in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and othermost parts of the world. So it's a very missiological construct. But as you trace the book of Acts, as you trace the New Testament, I think a big question that we're constantly asking is the question that you're saying, is the minority question. When minorities are entered into a majority, context, the question that you see Galatians, Romans, is like, how Jewish do I need to be in order to be Christian? And so that was a question that oftentimes they were asking. Do I need to be circumcised? Do I need to, take the Sabbath? Do I need to, how much, as we begin, to build? And so that becomes the question. And Dr., so how is it unavoidable, I guess is the question.
And I will say this, and I'll try to be very brief because I know I will say this. I would say it's been proven. I would say it's been done. We've seen there's expressions of Christianity not only in very African places, whether we talk about Ethiopia, Lalibela, and Nubia, but I would say that even African American Christianity has its own expression, and I feel like oftentimes we want to veer away from that because we don't feel like it's sophisticated enough to be included in whatever conversation is adequate for the plush halls of our seminary, if that makes sense. When I think about spirituals, when I think about the richness of spirituals throughout history, those things were not only emotionally rich, but they're theologically rich and they're socially rich. However, that music today would be seen as it's rudimentary. It's simple compared to the hymns or the hill songs of today. And I would say that is part of our problem with assimilation is that we lose a bit of ourselves when trying to introduce ourselves into majority context. No. And I would say that's not only a spiritual problem, but I believe there's a social problem and implication of that as well.
No, and I think that's spot on. Because in there, and I think I forgot the name of the women, but it's the idea of the danger of the single story. That was a TED talk. It was an African woman talking about the danger of a single story and how minorities get a single story, where in majority cultures there's multiple different stories and tons of diversity that in terms of expression. Dr. Yancey, you spent a lot of times by anybody. Those who don't know, this is Dr. George Yancey. He has been a good friend of ours. He's a professor. He used to be at the University of North Texas. He has traded on us, and he is now at the Baylor University. But we will allow that to go by. But he is someone who has studied this, the church, the diversity of the church in many ways. In your studies, Dr. Yancey, how has this played out? This idea of kind of what Sho was talking about in just the tension that you have of assimilation into the majority context or the Anglo context or white conformity or white evangelicalism. Because oftentimes, again, it comes back to the question becomes is, how much like white evangelicalism do I need to be in order to be respected as a Christian? Sometimes can be the question that people are asking. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, multiple thoughts. See if I can condense this down. The Black church, of course, rose in resistance to slavery and Jim Crow later in this time. Initially, it was, blacks were allowed to go to white churches. Then they were not allowed from their own church, form their own expressions in many ways. And in many ways, it was a Christianity, and it was Christianity in resistance to slavery and sort of spirituals and things that they're very familiar with. To some degree, if you think about society just in general, there's going to be some integration. The question is on what and where, and how can we have the sort of expression we need to bring in the different voices. It's just the fact that we use the same language is an integration. It's a cultural integration. We use the same language. We have to in order to communicate with each other. So I don't see integration in of itself as bad. Life is about balance, and you get unbalanced at anything, and it just goes off the rails. And so, obviously, when we integrate into where we have to mimic whites in order to be accepted, that's a problem. If we're integrating on things that are eternal, then things that are right, then that is what we should be integrating on. Finding that balance is going to be tough because, let's just be honest, our country's history, if we look at race relations, is about 400 and 500 years of intensive racial abuse and about a few decades of trying to remedy it, and now maybe a couple of decades where we can say, hey, it's okay to say we're all right? That does not change overnight. Sexual abuse does not change in a few decades. I am hopeful that maybe in my kid's lifetime we may see the ultimate changes. Maybe in my kid's lifetime. I'm not hopeful in my own lifetime, unfortunately. And so, how do you overcome all of that? And how do we create societies where we have the healthy type of integration, where we find the things that are common that we should have in common, and yet allow other people to bring in different voices. Right. There is no one right answer.
Right, but that's difficult, and that's kind of what I'm trying to say, that the integration, but the differentiation is it, because you even see that in like pure like the biology. When you are raised, as children, they talk about the difference between co-regulation and differentiation, right? And that the child begins to differentiate like at the age of 2, and if they don't differentiate, then they would say that there's something wrong, and it's kind of like this idea of codependence and all these things. So there's something that's human that's about huh?
That's like attachment theory.
Yeah, attachment theory. So it's like the idea of differentiating, and so I guess part of this is where, like you said, striking that balance, and then does that become in the eyes of the beholder and being able to create? Because again, most of the councils in Jerusalem early on was about how Jewish you need to be. They were saying sometimes Titus, does he need to be circumcised, or Timothy? All right, we circumcised Timothy, but Paul was like, no, we're not circumcising Titus. And it's so you have these tensions in there. And so how do you bring that tension or that balance, or how, between what you are going to integrate because you are an American, but then another other side of that?
I think as Dr. Yancey said, like, we are in America, the Western Hemisphere is in a predicament that most of the Eastern doesn't really have, because of slavery and how slavery's impact and the racial integration are mixing, if you will. It's like we have to. Dave Chappelle has a joke, like he says, people in China aren't racist because everybody's Chinese. So it's obviously all analogies fall apart, but the reality is that we have unprecedented issues that we have to deal with. I think the way that, and since this is a Christian conversation, I think the one thing that I am just most passionate about addressing is the theology, I think, that denies the dignity on a holistic level. For us to have a theology that believes that God created us in perfect relationship with him, perfect relationship with one another, and perfect in how we are to create and cultivate, but to see all that fall apart with the entrance of sin, to have a theology that doesn't believe that systems or systemic injustices aren't called to be redeemed with the the belief of Jesus, to me, is an anemic gospel, right? Because ultimately what happens is, in a lot of our churches and a lot of our denominations, is folks believe that there's a personal responsibility and that we're to have relational responsibility in regards to redemption, but the social justice aspect of this redemption is void. And until we have a theology that says, no, it's not just about personal piety, but it's about how we've created and cultivated and how those things created corruption and how God's redeeming that also, I think we're going to continue to see problems with how people integrate into society. Yeah. Because if I step into a church and all I hear is the praise of men who own slaves, and they're never addressing the anemic theology that they had, well, that's grading against me as a human being. Right. Now, I also recognize that all people are flawed. We all have issues, and there is no perfect theology, and no one encapsulates perfect theology. But I also recognize that there's a difference between preaching to me as a human being and denying me or denying the things that I think will communicate a holistic approach that tells me that I am to be redeemed to God, to one another, and to the things that are created. And if we believe we are in a system or in a country that was created for the benefit of a particular type of people, then we have to speak to that. And I think when we talk about integration, we have to put that in perspective. It's not just integrating into a perfect society where everybody was included. We're trying to integrate into systems and institutions that were created for the benefit of a particular group of people. Right. And I think that does it's a little some sort of psychological nuance in that happens even within Black people who go to white seminaries, who are a part of predominantly white institutions, who work within white music industries. You begin to create things that appease those people, right? Mm-hmm. And then because there's incentives for that. There's incentives to maintain this particular platform, to ascend this social status. And then what ends up happening is someone gets shot by an unarmed police officer and you comment on it and they say, no, just preach the gospel. And you're like, well, the gospel of my particular ancestors was a gospel that addressed the social issues as well as praise the God who is going to take me to heaven, right? I think about, and I'll stop here, I think about one of my favorite hymns that make no sense on the ground, but it's I got shoes, you got shoes, all of God's people got shoes. When I get to heaven, I'm going to dance all over God's heaven. And you're like, why are people singing about I got shoes, you got shoes? When you think about it, it's a very socially driven song. It's saying, as slaves, we didn't have the ability to have shoes, but when I get to heaven, my God cares for me so much that he's going to provide me the basic utility of shoes because human beings deserve shoes, right? And this is a song that addresses the social issues as well as says, like, my relationship with God is so paramount that he's going to provide my basic needs and I'm going to be in a heaven celebrating with him. And I just want to know, I just want to be a part of a gospel that says, in a community of people who say the gospel, the institutions, the communities that I live in aren't just preaching a message that says, get to heaven and not address the earthly hell as MLK used to talk about.
Yeah, and I think that is spot on, and I appreciate your word show. And I think this is the part of the problem, and I think that even the homogeneous church can continue to perpetuate, though. And this is and let me just say this in this way. The reason why I think that it perpetuates it is a couple of things. One, when you talk about the issue of racism and, discrimination and sin, and, I think yesterday I just said, listen, on Tuesday I said, are we all willing to call racism, discrimination, and all that sin, period? Because some of us, we treat it as like a pet kind of a thing, like it's one of the white sins, white, things. But I said, it's sort of like me if I did everything, taking care of my family, my kids, all those things. But then I said, and I sleep around on my wife all the time. No one would say that I'm a good husband if I do everything else right, but then I have a whole bunch of other women that I sleep around with. But so many of us, specifically, that we have people who are racist in our churches because they do everything else well, but they're clearly racist. And we just say, good old so-and-so, that's like a pet sin that we just kind of have to deal with. So I think that there's, on one hand, we got to address that. It's like, no, that is not right. It's sin and it's grievous. But on the flip side of it, is that part of the reason why, like for us as Blueprint Church, right? Blueprint Church has never done a series, has never done any campaigns or anything against abortion. We do not believe in abortion, but we've never done anything on abortion, ever. But does that mean that we are pro-abortion? No. But so the problem is that whenever you have multi-ethnic churches, multi-congregational churches, are the ability to come together, and then there's a burden on you that the ability to put people up. I mean, this is the same way. And this is why parachurch ministries like Campus Crusade and all those things is that all the evangelists get together, all the disciplers get together, all the people, teachers get together, and we just congregate with people who only look like me, talk like me, act like me, believe the same way that I have. And you don't get the manifold wisdom that they talk about in Ephesians chapter 3 of the global or the ecclesia, and we end up creating these homogeneous microcosms that is about our issues and our issues alone. We're not valuing the other ones. But I think God has placed a burden on all of us to get together to fight through these issues. And I think that because of that, when Paul, as an apostle, was going to Gentile nations, that's why theological and doctrinal and missiological issues were coming up, because we didn't have problems when everybody was Jewish. The problems began when Paul started reaching Judea and Samaria and to the ends of the earth. That's when the problem came. So I guess that is what I'm saying, is that the church is kind of like these problems that we're talking about today is built in to the very fabric of being a missiological religion, are expressing in so many different ways. And the question that we always have to answer is, how ethnically centric do we have to be in order to be Christian? So, I mean, I said a lot. I'm going to give you guys the final words. Because we got about 3 minutes. I'm already over 3 minutes. So I'll start with you, Dr. Yancey, to give some final words or just kind of wrapping up this conversation, and then I'll end with you, Sho.
Yeah, let me just wrap it up just by pointing out why I think the approach I'm talking about, as far as having a dialogue with other people that you disagree with, figure out how we can work together, is so important. And that's because of human depravity, and it's in all of us. I'm constantly reminded on how much I fall short, and so that gives me some grace when I'm with someone. Not always. I mean, I always don't have grace, but sometimes it gives me grace to realize that. And I'll just bring this up real quick. I know this isn't directly what we're talking about, but since you brought the 2016 election, I was very anti-Trump. I'll just be very honest about that. But what I did was, instead of, and I had my feelings during the election, and believe me, I was shocked like everyone else. But I spent some time just listening to people why they wanted to vote for Trump. Not that I wanted to be convinced that they were right, but I want to know when I talk to them that I'm actually talking to the real concerns of theirs, and not some sort of caricature. Mm-hmm. We can start talking to each other, not at caricatures, but where people are really at. I want to convince some people on how to see things my way. I have to be willing to learn how to see things their way. And if I can see that, maybe I can convince them, that we need to do more than what we're doing right now, to see some of the systems that's being talked about. And, I can't, there's a role for the prophecy, but there's also a role to just have this conversation. And I would push the church towards that conversation as much as possible.
Amen. Thank you. I really do appreciate it. I do think that the church, we need to be able to have honest conversations, and we got to be able to offend one another in these conversations. Thank you. Dr. Sho?
Yeah, that's what I say. Call me Dr. Sho. I am a professor, by the way.
Amen.
I don't know if you knew, I was a professor at Wake Forest this past semester. But so anyway, I agree. I think that I think we can all use a little bit of conversation. Let me also start by saying the Black church is not monolithic as well. And when I talk about my desire for Black affirmation and Black identity within the Christian space specifically, I'm not saying there's one way of doing that. There's one model. I would consider myself a Black evangelical, but I recognize that Black evangelicals are different from the Black traditional church. And so, I mean, there's different perspectives. However, the one thing that I think that the Christian faith is one of the pandemics that have been prevalent within all of the spaces of Black Christianity, if you will, is that it seems as if our identity is oftentimes built in opposition to whiteness or what white people say about us. And people take different approaches on how to remedy that. They either try to say, let's integrate into society, or they say, let's complete isolation. I'm not saying complete isolation, and I'm not saying complete integration. What I'm saying is, how do we begin to operate, as you say, in a world that is forcing us to integrate, right? While at the same time, not allowing ourselves to become slaves is the first, slaves to the opinions of how white people or how white evangelicalism and white structures and even white supremacy is said, has communicated about Blackness, has communicated what proper theology is, has communicated how we are to integrate. Because oftentimes when we talk about integration, who sets the rules for those integration, for that integration? Yeah. When we talk about, so ultimately, what I would love to see is for us to be patient, for us to be gracious, for us to be diplomatic and charitable, but at the same time, understanding that Paul did preach a different gospel than Timothy, as they say, and he understood who he was going to. And as you go to the Colossian church, or you go to the Corinthian church, or you go to Ephesus, there are particular cultures. And as long as the gospel is not offended, as long as it's not amended, it's not changed, the gospel can exist within a particular distinct ethnicity. And I believe that we are a distinct ethnic group who can't emulate everything that the white evangelical church has. And we need to start figuring out what that looks like. And I don't necessarily have all the answers, but if you want to hire me, I will definitely consult you on what I think is best. So,
amen. So that is his resume, ladies and gentlemen. If you want a consultant, he is here for you. My brother, Show Baraka, the Show Baraka Show. Give us the sign. Let us see the symbol again. The Show Baraka Show.
It's backwards. I think it's backwards on.
Okay. The Show Baraka Show. You can
shout out to Tuskegee and University of
UNT. Embrace both sides. So embrace both sides. We are excited, and we're about to end. And Dr. George Yancey, who used to be UNT as well, but now has traded his stripes for the Baylor Bears. But we love them both. We love them both Baylor and UNT. We love Show. We love Tuskegee, TU. And we love you guys. Thank you, Blueprint Church, for joining us. We appreciate it. We'll have to get you guys on again, because this discussion can continue to go on and on and on. But we got to move from just like these types of to action. So let's just keep talking. Let's keep talking. Let's keep preparing, and let's keep praying. Love you guys, and we'll see you later.
God bless you.
God bless you guys. Thank you.